Hi guys, it's Kathy. I hope you're doing well. We're back to OJ again. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait. We took a day off and that's hard. Feels like I haven't done this in a while. If you're new to this OJ, we're in we're deep in the science part. So this is not the murder part. Um, Lawyers are not very fighting very much right now. We're just learning about DNA and the same questions over and over again about DNA. So we have to get through this part to get to the good stuff. So here we go. Up, up. I don't have it on double speed. I'm working on it. I'm doing it right now. Not double speed. Not double speed. Not double.
Purpose. The PCR components themselves, the mix that has in it the primers and the enzyme and the A's, T's, G's, and C's, that could possibly be contaminated with DNA if it were not handled properly. So all of these negative controls are a way to make sure that everything you're adding to the sample is free of any extraneous DNA.
What happens in the typing process if you determine that in your negative control,
Kelly,
for
thank
instance,
you. Thank you,
types that shouldn't
Kelly.
be there?
Generally, and I'm saying generally because there may be an occasional exception in a laboratory to this, but generally if your negative control comes out with a type, you would disregard all the results for that test and go back and repeat the test.
Okay, is there then a second, as you described, type of negative control?
Yes, and in our lab, that's referred to as a reagent blank control.
What does that control consist of?
It consists of everything that was added to the evidence from the beginning of the analysis. If you break the analysis down into DNA extraction and then setting up the amplification, in both those procedures, you're adding things to your evidence samples or to your known samples. So this control makes sure that when you add things to the PCR setup, those components don't have DNA. And the reagent blank control does the same thing, but goes back as far as the DNA extraction and lets you assess whether or not in adding things to the evidence to perform the DNA extraction that you are not inadvertently adding some DNA in there.
As far as inadvertently adding DNA, how does this control perform?
I still write cursive, and everybody in my circle can read it. Like my children can read it, and my nephews and my nieces can read it. It's just who has time to pick up your pencil every single time you are writing a new letter? I don't have time for that.
That process actually perform that role.
Let's say you have a tube in front of you and you're beginning to do your DNA extraction and you're adding some solution that is a chemical solution. It might have salt. Depends on how you're going to do your DNA extraction. You want to make sure that that solution that you're adding hasn't any DNA in it. So everything that you add to I don't know how else to say it, everything that you add to the evidence gets added to this blank tube. So at the end, if you have DNA in this blank tube, that tells you.
Did you guys ever see Russian cursive? Hold my beer. Hold on, I'll be right back.
That you would have been the same things that got added to that blank tube.
I mean, I'm still here,
to the evidence.
but I'm looking somewhere else.
Added some DNA-containing cells to the evidence.
And if you see results in this negative control where you actually see types, what does that tell you?
If you saw a full-blown type, you would certainly declare the results of your analysis inconclusive. For most instances, if you saw something in the reagent blank, you would declare your results inconclusive. I can think of a few examples of when you wouldn't do that, or you might consider not doing that. But in general, that would be what you would do.
So is this then a third alert to you of potential problems?
Yes, that each one of these controls is an alert to you of a problem that could have occurred, and it helps you sort out where that problem could have occurred.
And then again, I believe you said there was a fourth control as well, or actually a third type of control, but a fourth control.
If you do a substrate control, that's another type of control.
On these typing strips themselves, is there an additional control?
On the typing strips themselves, there is a dot which needs to appear in order to assure you that you had enough amplified DNA to get a reliable result.
As far as these dots, do they alert you to the potential problems in this typing process? And I'm referring to the dots that you just described that have DNA in them.
The control dots,
Control dots, yes.
they don't alert you to a problem. They alert you to the fact that they say you had enough DNA in your sample, that is, you had enough amplified DNA in your sample, and the results on this strip are reliable because you can see this control dot. If you don't see the control dot, it may mean that you're missing some types. You may see some types, but you can't be assured that you're seeing every type that could be there.
As far as these control, or that control dot, was that in fact present on the typing strips that were passed around to the jury earlier, although bearing in mind that those strips had not been developed?
Yes, the control dot on the strips that were typed around is designated with an S. And you wouldn't have seen it because they haven't been developed. But where there was a designation for an S, that's where the control dot would be.
How?
Your Honor,
Come
I
on.
would like to ask the witness
How do you
in this
read
subject
that?
area some brief questions, and the exhibit is equals 252, one of the large charts.
Shut up, Bill.
All right, would you like Dr. Cotton to remain there?
It already
Actually, I
has
think
gone
Dr.
on
Cotton, if you could
forever.
just stand by and not get hit by the chart.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fairlawn.
Mr. Clark.
Thank you. With regard to this chart, Dr. Cotton, People's Exhibit 252, the strips that we see on the left-hand side of this diagram, those are strips that are used to type what genetic marker?
The strips that are depicted here are for typing the DQ alpha marker.
And on those strips, is there a specific location where the control dot is that you just described?
Yes,
Could you point that out, please?
it's just to the my right of the C here. So this dot that is between the C and the number 1.1, this is the control dot.
And is that the dot that then performs that function or role that you just described when you were writing on the diagram People's Exhibit 254?
Yes.
Is there a similar dot then on the strips used to type the 5 polymarkers?
There is, and it has a designation as an S dot, but in fact it is made up of the same components and performs exactly the same function as the C dot.
All right, very good, thank you. Dr. Cotton, you also described or used the term unstained control, was it?
I either said that or I may have said substrate control.
All right, does that item have a particular, or that term have a particular meaning to you?
Yes, it does.
What is that?
It would be a best example I can think of is a stain on a garment. It would be a portion of that garment that did not have any apparent stain, which you could then type and use that to help you interpret your results on the stained portion of the garment.
In what way? How does that assist in the interpretation of any results from a stained portion?
Well, it may assist in that the control portion may not have any type at all, and that would just be a general indication that the garment itself, usually control is taken very near the stain. So I'm not thinking about taking a control on one shoulder and then looking at a stain on another shoulder. So you're taking the control near where the stain is and you're saying, well, I don't have any additional DNA besides what I'm seeing, and therefore what I'm seeing from the stain is probably all the DNA that's there. I mean, the other obvious result is that you got a type from your control section, and that might mean, for example, suppose someone had worn a shirt for a very long time, a week or something. You might actually pick up some of that person's type who had worn the shirt for a week on a control section. You might see that type reflected in a stain section as well. So it would just be information on the condition of the surrounding area of the stain.
Why would you be able to see a person's type on a garment that had been worn for some time?
Because you may have skin cells that, if you've worn a garment for a really long time, may have adhered to the fabric. You may have a sufficient number that you would actually see a type. Now, I haven't done an experiment on this, but I've just used this as an example.
All right. As far as these unstained or substrate controls, as you've just described them, do they play any role in determining whether or not contamination of a sample may have occurred?
It doesn't, well, actually, yes, it would help you to determine that as well. If you picked up a type on the unstained portion, the other explanation, other than what is, either that type existed on that unstained portion at the time it was collected, or it had been deposited on there somewhere during the processing. And there's no way you could be able to distinguish which of those two scenarios had happened. It would just alert you to either the thing had DNA on it
I'm
when you
sorry, I
started,
was
or some extraneous
doing
DNA
something.
may
What
have
what
gotten
did
on
I
it during the
miss?
processing, and you couldn't tell the difference.
How often do you receive unstained or substrate controls in casework at Cellmark?
I don't know how to give you an exact figure. We receive them some of the time. Most of the time, we do not.
As far as all of these controls that you've described, do they all represent different versions of basically lights that can be lit or alerts to you about the potential for problems?
That's exactly right.
Now, turning in particular to the strips, and these are these PCR typing strips, and I believe just a few moments ago you pointed to a DQ alpha typing strip, and then you also, or we also showed to the jury a polymarker typing strip, is that right?
That's right.
These results, and I believe you've already described this, are actually read visually. That is a person looking at them and deciding where there are positive results and where there aren't. Is that right?
That's right.
And by positive results,
Blue dots.
blue dots. Does one person simply read those results in the laboratory to determine what the types are that are present?
Well, not in our laboratory, and I can't speak for every laboratory. Every laboratory that does this does not have exactly the identical procedure. In our laboratory, the evidence samples are read by two individuals. If you're doing a known sample, that sample may only needs to be read by one person. But any evidence sample gets read by two people.
As far as these results themselves, are they maintained? Do the strips still exist, for instance, if you want to look at a case a day later, a week later, a year later, and so forth?
These strips still exist, and you could go look at them, but they are not the best permanent record of the results because the blue color in the dots can fade over time.
What steps, if any, do you take to record these results at the time that they're read so that they can be looked at later?
There's two things that are done. The strips are read visually by two different analysts, and those readings are recorded on paper. And the strips are photographed, and those photographs are maintained in the case file.
Are those photos then provided, for example, to prosecutors in cases?
Yes.
Are they provided to the court, for instance, on occasion?
They're provided. There are two original photos that are taken. Generally, we maintain one, and the other one is provided to the court, to the defense, or to the prosecution, whoever's in need of that copy.
Does that allow those results then to be reviewed at a later time by any of those people you've just described?
Yes.
Or even by experts retained by either side?
That's right.
Now, I'd like to turn your attention, Dr. Cotton, to an area frequently referred to as proficiency testing. What is proficiency testing?
Proficiency testing is generally the receipt of samples in a laboratory where the samples are sent from an agency or an organization who's engaged in providing proficiency tests. And it's just that, it's sort of a test. The agency knows what the answers should be. They're sending samples to the laboratory. The laboratory in general is aware that these are proficiency test samples, does the analysis, reports the results back to the agency, and then the agency, which may also send these tests out to many other laboratories, will compile the results and send a report out.
What's the purpose of proficiency testing?
It's to enable you to make an unbiased judgment about how well your laboratory is performing, because you have an opportunity to do a set of samples where someone else knows what the answer should be, and also to compare how you did with how other laboratories receiving equivalent samples would do or did.
Incidentally, is Cellmark, and you described yesterday Cellmark in the United Kingdom, is it involved in providing proficiency samples to any laboratories?
Cellmark in the United Kingdom has a proficiency test program where they do provide proficiency samples to other laboratories, and we receive them, and many other labs in the United States do as well.
As far as these proficiency tests, are they taken by analysts in your laboratory?
Yes.
Who participates in taking those tests?
Everyone that is involved in doing any kind of analysis for forensic or paternity casework takes proficiency tests during the year, and generally each analyst is required to perform 2 per year.
Does that include yourself?
Includes myself and the other PhD staff, since we are involved in the analysis of the casework results.
You touched briefly yesterday on the fact that there are other individuals in your laboratory who perform the actual bench work. Is that right?
That's right.
And would this be actually pouring in the reagents, manipulating the steps necessary in the tests, and then ultimately producing the product that's eventually read and interpreted?
That's right.
In this case, and we'll return to it a little bit more a little later, in this case, who were those individuals who actually performed this work in this case?
The work in this case was done by Julie Cooper, and Paula Yates.
With respect to both of those individuals, have they participated in proficiency testing as well while at Cellmark?
Yes.
These proficiency tests, can you describe in a little bit more detail about how they're set up and in what form they're sent to the laboratory for purposes of testing?
I can tell you how we receive them. I don't know very much about how they're set up since I'm not involved in doing that. We generally will receive the samples. They're usually shipped at room temperature, and for forensics samples, they're made to be similar to case samples. So they're usually blood stains, and the knowns are usually blood stains on cotton cloth. And the evidence samples may be blood stains or semen stains or some mixture. And generally, a proficiency test will consist of 3 or 4 samples, which would be the typical number of samples that might be in one case. At least that's for our laboratory. Typically, for a single case, it'll be average maybe 4 samples. And they are received by our quality assurance coordinator, and then she hands them out to whoever is next in line to do a set of proficiency samples.
As far as these samples, when they're sent to you, and if let's assume you're an analyst actually determining what the results from typing of these samples are you informed ahead of time of what the results are?
No, that's the whole point. You don't know what the results are supposed to be.
Are you therefore required to complete the test, report the results, and then later you find out if you did it correctly?
That's right.
Now, how often are these tests, and I believe you touched on that, you may have already answered this, how often are members of your laboratory required to take these tests?
Twice a year.
Are there any organizations that set recommended frequencies for taking tests like this?
There are 2 organizations who have guidelines for laboratories that are engaged in DNA analysis, and both of those organizations, in regards to proficiency tests, recommend that each analyst or each person involved in casework do 2 tests per year at a minimum.
What organizations are those?
One organization carries the acronym TWGDAM. It's TWGDAM, which stands for the Technical Working Group on DNA Analysis Methods, and is sponsored by the FBI and consists of crime laboratories from around the United States and members of the FBI laboratory.
Does that group also issue guidelines on a range of areas involved in DNA testing?
They've issued guidelines on conducting DNA testing, staff for DNA testing, and quality assurance programs for laboratories engaged in DNA testing.
What was the second organization?
The second organization is ASCLD Lab, AS, and again, it's another acronym, ASCLD/LAB. That is the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors Laboratory Accreditation Board.
If this jury had previously heard testimony about ASCLD, would that be the same organization?
It would.
When did Cellmark begin taking proficiency tests?
In 1988.
And was that shortly after the laboratory began performing casework? Or do you recall?
The first proficiency test that I'm aware of that Cellmark took was actually received in late 1987. So it would have been received about the same time, in the same time range as we started doing casework.
Do you, as part of the business at Cellmark, compile information about how the laboratory has performed in these proficiency tests since they were begun?
Yes.
As far as the taking of these tests, these proficiency tests, and the results, can you describe for us, beginning back when proficiency started, how the laboratory has performed?
Yes.
All right, would you do so?
Let me preface my remarks by a very brief explanation that proficiency tests have been available all during the time that DNA testing has been done. But early on, proficiency testing specifically designed for DNA testing labs was not available, and the tests were geared more towards serology analysis. In 1988, or actually late 1987, there was a proficiency test put together by the California Association of Crime Laboratory Directors, which Cellmark agreed to participate in. That test was not a typical proficiency test as I have just described one to you, and the reason is that that test consisted of 49 samples. There were no designated known samples and unknown samples, so what I'm really saying is that that proficiency test did not resemble a regular case in terms of the number of samples and the fact that in a normal case you have known samples and unknown samples. Apart from that, the samples were forensic type samples, stains, and so forth. In that proficiency test, we provided results back to the CACLD, which is the abbreviation for California Association of Crime Laboratory Directors. And we later found out that we had one error in that proficiency test. That is, we matched a sample to another sample, and that match was incorrect.
With regard to those results, incidentally, were the remainder of the results, how did you do on those?
The remainder of the matches that we got were okay. There were some samples that we didn't get any DNA from. There were some samples that we didn't get a pattern from that was usable. So I'm not implying the rest of the results were perfect, but there were no other incorrect matches in the results other than the one.
As far as this error, as you've described it, do you just take that error into account and just continue in your work, or do you take any action as a result of that?
I certainly wouldn't want to just continue working without attempting to figure out what had caused such a significant error. So the procedure that followed was the people that had worked on the test went back and examined all of their records, all of the tubes that they had kept during the analysis of that test. And they were able, and I'm saying they, although I was there at the time, I didn't participate directly in figuring this out. They were able to determine where the error had occurred and what had happened to cause that error. And that was helpful then in making some changes in our procedure to improve the procedure.
In what way?
Well, there were two changes made to address the error. You sort of have to know what the error was for it to make a lot of sense, but there were changes in how the tubes were labeled, so that, because part of the problem was that an analyst couldn't read the labeling well on the tube. And there was also a piece of equipment purchased to help us avoid the situation that had caused the error.
All right. In terms of proficiency tests taken after that time, can you describe the performance of the laboratory?
We're going to work up in years here,
Okay.
I assume. Okay, so then comes along 1989. Now, actually, without the document in front of me, there may have been a few other tests in 1988 besides this large one. And as far as those tests went, there was nothing wrong with Cellmark's performance. In 1989, there were tests taken, and for the most part, there was no problems with Cellmark's results. But in 1989, we again accepted a sample set from CACLD. This sample set consisted of 50 samples, was designed the same way the first one was, and Cellmark had an additional error in 1989, an incorrect match in that 50 sample set.
As a result of that error, was any further review undertaken, or was this again or was this a situation in which you just continued on with casework?
As a result of that error, additional review was undertaken. It took quite a long time to do that review because there was a lot of material to look at. The specific error was not able to be determined. We could narrow it down to a particular two samples between which the error had occurred, and we knew the step at which the error had occurred, but exactly how it occurred, we can't tell. I can't tell you, and I was part of this analysis. We went in and looked at our procedure, and the adjustment that we made to our procedure as a result of this test was one that I've already talked about, and that was the mandate in the procedure that you do not do the DNA extraction for evidence and known samples at the same time in the same place. That is, you do the evidence, you put that away, and then you do the known samples. Because this was a situation where DNA...
So there's two types of people in this world. So one, that they start a project, they finish the project, and they put all their stuff away. And then there's 99% of the rest of us who start 20 projects at the same time. And then no matter where they go in the house, they run into a project that they've started and their stuff is out and they're ready for more work to be done. So I guess I could never do, this is not a job I could ever do. How though? I mean, I can't imagine living in a world where you can sit down and do a task to its completion and then put that task away and start another task. I can't even fathom it. When I was working in IT and I was writing code, I couldn't sit there and write a piece of code and not be bombarded by 1,000 other things. Do you know how quality our work would be if employers would let us sit and do a task to completion. That would be that would be pretty freaking cool. Just that would be nice. Even these videos that I make, I can't sit and make a video uh, because like I'm recording other videos and this and that. And as a server, forget it. You can't just focus on one table. So now there's no. I wonder what job I could get where I could just sit and finish one task. I can't even think of one. I know she's saying that that's what she does, but that would be cool.
From one sample had contaminated another. And obviously, the most critical contamination that you could have would be from a known sample to an evidence sample. And so, to avoid that, those samples are not extracted at the same time. And that was the adjustment that we made in our procedure as a result of that error in 1989.
Are changes or improvements in procedure one of the goals of proficiency testing or one of the benefits?
Well, they're one of the benefits. It does give you a window on your work that you wouldn't have if you weren't taking proficiency testing.
That was 1989, is that right?
That's right. Now, again, there would have been some other proficiency tests taken during 1989 that would be similar to the typical ones that I described before, where you get 3 or 4 samples, and there were no false matches or false exclusions in any of the other tests in 1989.
All right. What about 1990?
From 1990 to the present time, we have continued to take proficiency tests. They are all now, in fact, the proficiency tests are much better now than they were back then because they're designed for DNA analysis laboratories specifically. And as I said, they generally consist of 3 or 4 samples. And since that time, there have been no further errors in proficiency tests in terms of incorrect matches or incorrect exclusions in our proficiency testing.
During that time period from 1990 through 1995, approximately how many different tests are we talking about? Can you estimate that?
You know, that's all listed in a document that I know you have and I have a copy of, but it's not down here with me. Um, the best, let's estimate it this way. We have had, for the most part, during these years, 6 or 7 analysts, and they've taken at least 2 tests per year, occasionally more than that. So you're doing about, say, 14 tests per year at a minimum.
Would then one add also onto that the 3 PhDs who also perform these tests?
We don't get a separate test because what the design of the test is that you do it as if it were a regular case. So we are participating in the test in our normal role for doing casework. So we don't get additional tests that are directed just towards us.
All right. As far as licenses, does Cellmark hold any licenses?
Yes, we do.
Can you describe those, please?
We hold a license to handle radioactivity. We hold a license to transport. It's a clinical laboratory under the Clinical Laboratory Improvement Act to basically that allows us to transport samples across state lines. And there's an inspection associated with that license. We have a license in the state of Maryland to do molecular biology techniques. There's an inspection associated with that license. We have a few other odd licenses that aren't very relevant.
Is there any certification or accreditation process involving DNA testing laboratories in this country?
Yes, there is.
Can you tell us about that, please?
There are actually 3 programs of which we participate in 2. One of them is sponsored by the American Association of Blood Banks, and I mentioned that, I think, yesterday, and it is an accreditation for doing paternity testing. And you can get accredited using for like HLA testing or ABO testing. Since we only do DNA testing, our accreditation is in that area only.
Of paternity testing?
Yes, that is doing paternity testing using DNA analysis.
Through the American Association of Blood Banks?
That's right.
Are there any other organizations who participate in accrediting or certifying DNA laboratories?
There is another organization that accredits laboratories for paternity testing, and it's a very similar program to that of the American Association of Blood Banks, and we aren't currently participating in that program. And there is a program sponsored by ASCLD, that is the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, for accreditation of forensic laboratories doing DNA analysis. And we hold an accreditation from that organization.
I'm sorry, did you say you have been accredited by ASCLD?
Yes, we have.
As far as that accreditation, to your knowledge, were you the first private laboratory accredited by ASCLD?
Yes, there had been many, or I don't know about many, but 20-some DNA laboratories accredited by ASCLD, and these were all state labs or local labs or some type of government lab. So we were the first private for business laboratory that ASCLD accredited.
Now, in that process of accreditation by the American Society of Crime Laboratory Directors, What did that entail? What did it take to obtain that?
Was preparation involved about 6 months of work off and on. We submitted to them answers to a very long questionnaire. We submitted documentation of our procedures for quality assurance. We submitted documentation of our testing procedures in the laboratory. And I don't know, we submitted several, it's one of those things where you send in 3 copies and stuff like that. And then we were given an inspection date, and we had an inspection from ASCLD inspectors. We had 3 inspectors in our laboratory for 3 days, and they looked at individual cases. They looked at the laboratory facility. They interviewed all of the laboratory staff involved in forensic cases, and then they did an evaluation.
And as a result of that evaluation, what happened?
As a result of that evaluation, we received accreditation by that organization this past September.
As far as this accreditation process, did it include, for instance, the laboratory's use of RFLP typing in forensic cases?
Yes, it did.
Did it also include your laboratory's use of PCR in forensic cases?
Yes, it did.
You've also mentioned an organization that you've described as TWIGDAM or TWGDAM. Does that organization, and I believe you mentioned earlier, does that organization produce guidelines for DNA typing in forensic cases?
It does.
Can you tell us a little bit? You described some basic areas that those guidelines describe. Can you tell us in a little bit more detail how they cover forensic DNA typing?
It's very similar, although not identical, to the guidelines that you have to meet for ASCLD. The guidelines cover what kind of education and training your staff should have, what kind of quality assurance program you should have, what kind of documentation of the work that you do that you should keep. There are some specifications in there about how the DNA testing should be done, guidelines on general aspects of doing the DNA testing, and there are some guidelines as to how the results should be reported. There has been a separate document written by the same organization that covers in more detail what a good quality assurance program would encompass.
As far as these guidelines from TWIGDAM, does Cellmark follow those guidelines in its forensic casework?
Yes, we do.
Incidentally, I know you described TWIGDAM as being sponsored by the FBI. Is that right?
It's made up of a lot of crime labs, and my understanding is that it's sponsored by the FBI. We're not a participant. We are not a participant in TWIGDAM, so I'm not positive that that's correct.
In terms of your human identification or forensic casework at Cellmark, are you asked to perform testing exclusively by prosecuting agencies?
No.
Who else asks you to perform casework?
We may be asked to do casework by a defense attorney. And in terms of prosecuting agencies, I guess you're including both investigators and attorneys. So we work for whoever is interested in sending us a case.
In other words, by your last answer, you were referring to being asked to perform testing by prosecutor's office, like the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office in this case.
Yes, we might receive samples from a district attorney's office. We might receive samples sent to us by a crime lab, or we might receive samples from an investigator.
As far as your testing, is it the case that in some instances you obtain test results and after that criminal charges are filed in cases?
Yes, that happens sometimes.
Is it also the case that following your testing and casework, it may be that criminal charges already filed are dismissed?
Yes, absolutely.
Is it also the case that after obtaining results in your casework that in fact people may be released from prison as a result of those casework results?
One moment, Your Honor, just so I can speak to counsel. Thank you.
Proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. And lastly, Dr. Cotton, has your laboratory obtained results in cases that may lead to exonerations, that is, charges actually being dismissed?
Yes.
Now, as far as the laboratory itself, do you allow individuals not a part of the laboratory to visit your laboratory?
Yes.
And what can that include?
There's 2 general groups of folks that might include. We might be asked to have an expert. Suppose we're doing a case for the prosecution. We might be asked that a defense expert, that is a scientist working with the defense, to be allowed to come and view the testing while it's being done. And we do allow that. We have a set of guidelines that we feel that everybody needs to agree to. And if everybody agrees to those guidelines, an expert for the defense is allowed into the lab to watch testing. And we may have the reverse situation. We may have a case that's been done for either the prosecution or the defense, and another expert working for that same group may wish to come, who may then come to court to say, yes, I think this testing is okay, or no, I don't, but usually it's, yes, I do think it's okay. That expert may come to the lab, look at the laboratory, discuss laboratory procedures, ask laboratory staff questions or something to become familiar with how work is done in our lab.
Now, you described the fact that there are some guidelines in place about these visits.
Yes, there are.
What do they include?
As far as watching testing, the most important thing that they include is that the visitor will only be allowed in the laboratory when testing on that specific case is ongoing. And that is, there are many times during the testing where you do something and then you have to wait maybe 4 hours before you can do the next thing, so that the visitor isn't allowed in the lab during that 4-hour waiting period. They're asked to wait somewhere else. And the other really important criteria is that they're not allowed to ask questions of the analysts or talk to the analysts while the analyst is working. And that's really to make sure that the analyst is allowed to give their full attention to the samples that are in front of them, and they're not distracted by somebody saying, why are you doing that, or what step is this, or something like that.
All right, with regard to these visits, how common are they in cases?
They're not enormously common. We probably have defense experts in 3 or 4 times a year, maybe, probably not more than that.
So on the average, once every few months?
Yes,
All right, with regard to this case, did any such visits occur?
yes.
Could you describe that, please?
There were 2 visits. The first was a visit from Dr. Edward Blake and Dr. Henry Lee, and they came to the lab and witnessed and took part in, actually, the division of some of the samples. The samples were small bloodstained swatches. 10% of those samples was to be set aside for future testing, and Dr. Blake actually took the cuttings that were set aside for future testing.
All right.
And that was actually an exception to our guidelines, because normally we wouldn't let.
Objection, Your Honor, just a point of clarification.
Sidebar.
Yeah, 12 please.
Record should reflect we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. Dr. Cotton is again on the witness stand undergoing direct examination by Mr. Clark. Mr. Clark, you may continue.
Dr. Cotton, I believe we left off, and you had described a first visit made by experts from the defense in this case,
Yes,
and you had described the fact that Dr. Blake was present.
yes,
You also described the fact that he, in fact, actually performed some cutting of some samples at that time.
that's right.
All right, I'd like to return to that in a little more detail later, but as far as these cuttings, was his role limited as far as the cuttings are concerned to actually physically cutting a portion of those pieces of evidence?
That's right.
Did the entire evidence, including both sides of the cutting, so to speak, remain in your custody?
Yes, all of the pieces remained in the custody of Cellmark.
On that occasion, and do you recall approximately when that visit was?
Well, I think it was sometime in July of last year.
Was there anyone else present with Dr. Blake?
Dr. Lee and Mr. Neufeld.
And is that Dr. Henry Lee?
Yes,
Now, were there any other visits to your laboratory by the defense in this case?
yes.
When did that occur?
Oh gosh,
Approximately?
I haven't a clue without going to look it up. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is that something that you could look up during the break before tomorrow?
I can
Or-
look it up before
All right.
tomorrow.
I think that means we're not going to finish today.
I am not confident in finishing today, Your Honor. I'm
Let's-
sorry.
Let's move along.
Without getting into the date, Dr. Cotton, do you recall who was present during that visit? Who actually
Yes.
made the visit?
Yes, Dr. John Gertis came to visit the laboratory.
And this was an individual also working for the defense at that time?
That's correct.
What was the nature of that visit?
He came to the laboratory to basically look at the laboratory layout. We did that during the visit, and the mission was to examine documents that we hold at Cellmark that he or the defense wished that he look at.
Had he ever visited your laboratory before?
No, he had not.
All right. With respect to the types of cases your laboratory takes, you've described the fact that they involve human identification or forensic casework,
That's right.
paternity testing as well.
That's right.
I think
As
that's
far-
about the 6th time we've asked that question.
As far as other cases, does your laboratory have any contracts or have you had any contracts with the federal government?
We had a contract with the Department of Defense. I don't know that the contract is not still working. Or I don't know what the right term for that is, but it's done. Um, and the contract was for doing analysis for Desert Storm casualties.
So that was to help identify remains from the Persian Gulf War.
Yes.
Now, approximately how many cases does your laboratory perform work on in the course of a year?
Usually between 400 and 500.
And is that split up in any manner, paternity cases versus forensic
Oh,
cases?
I'm sorry. That four to 500 would be forensic cases only, and the paternity cases would be somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500.
You brought up the term earlier today, quality assurance. What is that?
Basically, it's the set of procedures that are worked alongside your normal work to make sure that the equipment is functioning um, and to ensure that the quality of the work that comes out of the laboratory is always high.
Do you actually have a person who's assigned this area of quality assurance?
Yes, we do.
And what's that person's role? What does he or she do?
She does a whole lot of different things. It might be a little easier just to sort of say what happens in a quality assurance program.
All right.
But for example, it includes being able to track and when reagents are made. That is, things come into the lab and they're used to make solutions, so they're records of those solutions. There are many different things in the labs that have to be at constant temperature, so all the refrigerators, freezers, water baths, and so on, all those temperatures are maintained. She's also responsible for administering and looking at proficiency tests. She does audits of the laboratory, that is, every month or 2 months, she will walk through the laboratory unannounced and check out to make sure that all the equipment is in order. Anything that should have been calibrated or adjusted on a routine basis, the records are in place that those calibrations or adjustments have been done. And I guess that's the general idea of what she does. And now I don't remember where I was supposed to go from there.
Just in terms of quality assurance, this person performs this function of overseeing quality assurance.
She oversees, yes, she oversees it. That doesn't mean she goes and does all the temperature checks, but she oversees the entire program.
Dr. Cotton, if you would you allow Mr. Clark to finish asking the question before you start your answer? Because we were both talking together.
Now, as far as casework, you receive cases in the laboratory, is that right?
That's correct.
What steps do you take to ensure that when you receive, for instance, a set of evidence samples and let's say 1 or 2 known samples, to ensure that the chain of custody or the integrity of that evidence remains proper?
The samples are assigned to a specific analyst. The analyst logs in each of the samples on a form. That means he or she writes down a specific description of the items that are received, how they were received, from whom they were received. We usually get a letter with the samples that says who we are allowed to contact regarding results, who we're going to send a bill to, and so on. The analyst has specific areas within a locked evidence room where he or she stores the materials. The analyst has custody of the materials the entire time they're at Cellmark, and during the testing keeps detailed records of where the samples are, at what stage in the testing. That is, she doesn't write down where they are because they would be in her area of the refrigerator or freezer, but she or he would write down they're in the freezer, they're in the refrigerator, if that was important to keep track. And there are a lot of forms that get filled out during the testing that document how the testing was performed. And then at the end of the testing, after the report is written, that person then returns the evidence or anything remaining from the evidence to the submitter.
You've described earlier that 2 individuals who actually performed testing in this case were Julie Cooper and, I'm sorry, did you mention the second individual?
I did, Paula Yates.
Paula Yates. Is there a title that they have in the laboratory?
Both Julie and Paula are senior molecular biologists.
Why were there 2 individuals performing the actual testing in this case?
Julie originally received the samples in this case, and sometime after she started the samples, she accepted a job at the Maryland State DNA Laboratory, where she's now a supervisor. And so because she was leaving Cellmark, she transferred custody of all of the materials at that time to Paula Yates, who continued on with the testing until it was completed.
Are you familiar with the qualifications of both Julie Cooper and Paula Yates?
Yes.
Can you briefly describe each of their qualifications at the time of their testing?
Both of them had worked for Cellmark for about 6 years. Paula is the supervisor of the forensic group, has a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Maryland, and about 6 years experience in doing forensic testing. Julie has a master's degree in forensic science from George Washington University. She also had about 6 years of experience in forensic testing.
Had you, prior to this case, previously worked with both of those individuals, Julie Cooper and Paula Yates?
Yes, many times.
And is that something, well, let me rephrase that. Did you in fact work with them on a number of cases prior to this case?
Yes,
Have you had an opportunity to review their casework in previous cases as well?
yes.
As far as the testing techniques that are used in the laboratory, do you have in place protocols about how tests are to be conducted?
Yes, we do.
First of all, what is a protocol?
Basically, it's sort of like a recipe book. It lists all the steps on how to do the test in a lot of detail.
Do these protocols apply to both your RFLP typing as well as your PCR typing?
Yes, there's a separate there's one book basically for RFLP and another book for PCR testing.
Is it common in science to have protocols describing how to conduct scientific tests?
Very common.
As far as these protocols, is it something, for instance, for either RFLP typing or PCR-based typing that's relatively short, or is it detailed and extensive?
I've seen protocols that are relatively short, and I've seen them that are detailed and extensive, and ours happens to be detailed and extensive.
Do you have any role in, for instance, either the creation or changes that are made to these written protocols?
Yes.
Can you describe that, please?
As laboratory director, my signature is required for final approval for any change in the procedure, and my signature is required yearly on the procedure as evidence of a yearly review. So I participate in that yearly review with the quality assurance coordinator, and if we decide to make a change or an addition to the protocol, someone else certainly might write that, and many people may look at it, but it requires my signature as laboratory director to be put into place.
I gather then changes are made to the protocol.
Frequently.
Why is that?
Many of the changes.
We haven't actually discussed O.J. Simpson during this trial yet, I don't think. I don't even know if we mentioned his name once. I don't know. We mentioned there was 11 cents on the ground, which turned out to be not 11 cents. There was a dog barking. There was a dog barking. There was ice cream melting. And then there was DNA. But they don't really say whose. So I don't even know if we've spoken about O.J. Simpson at all yet during this murder case.
Are simply additions. That is,
Dog
you
barking,
might
he's
add,
guilty.
For example, we were doing DQ alpha, and then we wanted to do the polymarker testing, so we had to write protocols that
There was a
now
bang.
included the polymarker testing.
There was a bang.
But the other thing is that you might go to a scientific meeting or read something in the literature where someone had discussed a procedure that gave very good results. You would then check that out in your laboratory, and then if it was giving better results than your current procedure, you would go ahead and change your protocol to reflect the improvement.
Is that the nature of science itself?
Yes.
As far as these protocols, do they start at a particular portion of the testing process and end at another one? Does that question make any sense?
Well, it just covers all the steps.
Okay, from what point to what point?
It starts at how do you log in the evidence? How do you properly receive the evidence is where it starts.
And then where does it end?
It ends in how do you interpret the results.
Are individuals who are working in the laboratory, such as Julie Cooper and Paula Yates, required to follow these protocols?
Yes.
What happens when something comes up in the course of testing?
Kind of vague, isn't it?
Yes, it was. Perhaps if I add a little more to it. What happens if something comes up in the course of testing that isn't covered by the protocols? What happens?
Generally, first you would make some notations about that in the case notes, and then you might consult with someone else. If there's something, if we think that something should be done that's unusual, that's outside the protocol, then we'll make notations about that. And that generally would require approval of one of the PhD staff.
Were your protocols reviewed by the ASCLD inspection team prior to you receiving their accreditation?
Yes, they were.
Now, you've described the fact that records are kept in the course of receiving evidence through the various testing processes. Is that right?
That's right.
And are you familiar with how those records are kept by the analysts themselves?
Yes, I am.
What's the basis? How come you're familiar with how they're done?
When my role in the case is to get all the records and including the results and a draft report and review the records, review the data, and review the report and participate in signing that report with the person who actually did the work with their own hands. So as part of my everyday job, I'm going through case records reading them, checking them, making sure that they're all in order so that I can sign the case when it's done.
To be able to describe results in a given case, how can you do that without actually sitting there and watching every step of the testing process?
When you're done with the test, you have some data, you have some information. So what I'm doing is participating with the analyst in interpretation of that data. And I have not sat and watched. I mean, if I was going to sit and watch, I might as well do it myself. I have not sat and watched every step of the test.
As far as your ability to offer an opinion, do you review all of the material in a given case prior to offering any opinions about it,
Yes.
whether that's in the form of testimony or in a written report?
In either case, I would be reviewing all of the data and most of the documentation in the folder.
Okay, I'd like to turn your attention to an area that's commonly referred to as population frequencies. Is that term familiar to you?
Yes, it is.
All right, what is that?
It's the expression of saying for a particular genetic characteristic within a population or large group of people, how often would you expect to find that characteristic?
For instance, would population frequencies enter into a description of approximately how many people have the ABO type, blood group type O, for instance?
Yes.
As far as population frequencies, could you describe, please, the education and training you've received in the area of frequencies?
My exposure to this particular area of biology has mainly been in the 7 years that I've been at Cellmark, because we deal with defining frequencies for the genetic markers that we use every day. So I have no specific training outside of Cellmark. We have a person on our staff who has a PhD in this particular area. And as a part of my job, and when I go to scientific meetings, I'm both hearing lectures in this area, and I make it a point to read the literature in this area as well.
How about your experience with frequencies in, for instance, casework?
Well, in terms of doing a case, if you have samples that are consistent with some known person, and this is part of your report, then as part of your report, if there is sufficient data, you're saying how often you might see this particular set of genetic characteristics. So in all the report, not all, but many of the reports that go out involve the calculation of frequencies for particular sets of genetic characteristics.
Do you consult with experts in the area of, well, let me rephrase that question. Is there a particular area of science that deals with, in particular, the area of populations and frequencies of genetic marker characteristics?
Yes, there is.
What's that called?
That discipline would be referred to as population genetics.
Do you, and have you, as a result of your employment at Cellmark since, I'm sorry, what year?
1988.
Have you consulted with population genetics experts about this area of population frequencies?
Yes, we have.
And I believe you mentioned that you had an individual in your laboratory whose field of specialty is population genetics.
Yes, one of our PhD staff, Dr. Lisa Foreman, is a population geneticist.
Do you routinely consult with her about population frequency information?
Certainly.
As far as work conducted in your laboratory, do you then use population frequency data as a means of describing the significance of your results?
Yes.
To your knowledge, has population frequency data been used for a substantial period of time?
Oh, yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, it's certainly been used in DNA typing since laboratories were initially engaged in that. But in terms of formulating information about serological results, the same kinds of calculations and information is usually provided. So if you have a set of information that includes blood types and PGM or however many markers you've done, you can do a calculation to say this particular set of markers would occur in some percentage of a particular population.
Is that related to, is it similar, different from population frequency use in DNA typing?
I would check on this, that I could give a very brief idea on her expertise in this particular area.
Or we're still establishing that at this point.
Do you recall the question?
Could you go ask it again?
Actually, Your Honor, would it be possible to have that reread, because I can't recall it
Is
exactly?
that related?
Actually, I can, I'm sorry. As far as this use of population frequency data, has it been in use for a substantial period of time?
Yes.
As far as its use, that is the use of population frequencies in casework, when did you begin using population frequency data in terms of reporting it in actual cases?
Are you talking about me personally or Cellmark in general?
Let's start with the laboratory.
Okay. there's going to be a little bit of time. There's a time frame in here where I can't be particularly accurate about the answer. I came to Cellmark in 1988, and sometime during that year, I started being involved in forensic casework. At the time that I started being involved in forensic casework, we were in the process of developing um, population data that would allow us to do that. I think that we were all providing some frequencies before that based on population data from the other Cellmark laboratory, but I'm not absolutely certain.
What about you personally?
The point at which I would have become involved would have been the point at which I began signing forensic casework, and I was also involved in setting up how the population samples at Cellmark would be analyzed and reported. So at that point, I became involved in discussing, understanding, and generating population frequencies as they relate to DNA typing.
Do you have any role in supervising the actual reporting of frequencies in your laboratory, that is in casework?
In terms of signing a particular case, both people who are signing that case have a role in generating and reporting that information. So in my role in signing cases, I am responsible for the information that's generated for that particular case. And I also have overall responsibility for the scientific information that comes out of the laboratory. So under that umbrella, I guess I would have some responsibility as well.
As far as your previous testimony as an expert in DNA typing, have you reported population frequencies during that testimony?
Yes, I have.
And I'm sorry, how many times did you said approximately you testified previously?
Oh, probably about 90 times.
And amongst that 90, is there any way you can put a figure or a rough estimate of the percentage of the time you report population frequency data?
I couldn't give you an exact figure since I'm not even giving you an exact figure of how many times I testified, but for most of the cases, probably 80 or 90% of the cases in which testimony is provided in court, we are providing some population genetic frequency for a particular set of markers.
The written protocols you have in place in the laboratory, do they describe the reporting of population frequencies?
Yes, they do.
And in what manner? Is it fairly short, detailed? Can you describe that?
The calculations, although they're done by computer, can also be done by hand, and the protocol simply describes how to go about entering that data. And that's for RFLP. For PCR results, we do not have a computer program to do the calculations for us, so the calculations are done by hand. And when you review a case, in my role in reviewing a case, those calculations have been done by the analyst. I'm checking them, and then we're both signing the report.
When you say that those are done by hand, do you mean by using a calculator or really by hand?
No, I mean by writing the individual frequencies down so that we have a permanent record of them, and then by using a calculator to multiply them together.
All right. With regard to this concept of population frequency,
Tiff is making me nervous. She's not down here yet. She's not downstairs. I have to go, guys. I'm going to go get her. I'm going to drag her out to go to work. I'm going to bring you with me, and I will be right back. Behave.
how do you calculate them for a given type, for instance, at a given genetic marker?
Objection to this foundation, Your Honor.
Sustain.
With regard to this area of population frequencies, is there a term called database?
Yes.
What's a database?
It's basically a sample of a population. Obviously you can't sample all the people in the country, or you couldn't even sample all the people in a given state. So you need to take a small subset of the total population and then regard that as your sample. It's similar to taking a poll for television viewing. Nobody calls up everybody who's watched television on a particular night. They take a sample of the people who have watched television on a particular night and make some assessment of the larger sample based on the larger population based on the small sample.
And how does that play a role in your ability to be able to estimate how common or how rare a set of characteristics is?
Well, I think you've just actually said the important word, that is estimate. If I have a sample of 200 individuals, for example, and I do an RFLP test on all those 200 individuals, I've now looked at, for any given genetic locus, I've looked at 400 chromosomes. So I have 400 pieces of information. And from that, I can ask the question, if I have a DNA band that's 5,000 base pairs long for this particular genetic locus, how often in my population sample do I find a person with this genetic characteristic, a DNA band at 5,000 base pairs?
Does that involve then the use of more than one database for a particular genetic marker?
Traditionally, databases are divided into racial or ethnic groups.
Objection to foundation rather than traditional.
Overruled.
You may continue.
our databases at Cellmark are divided into racial or ethnic groups. You could maintain any number of databases. In our laboratory, we have 3. They are popular, and I guess for the moment, I'll just speak about RFLP, but the situation for PCR is similar, and they are divided into African Americans, Caucasians, and Hispanics.
Why this concern with different databases from different racial or ethnic groups?
Sustain.
With regard to the area of population frequencies, are you familiar with other DNA laboratories and their methods of calculating these estimations of how common or how rare characteristics are?
Yes, I am.
How are you familiar with that?
Both from reading the literature, talking to other scientists, and hearing information presented at scientific meetings.
Is this something you do on a regular basis?
Do those things?
Yes.
Yes.
What about scientific literature? Does it play any role in your knowledge of the area of population frequency data?
Yes.
Can you describe that in more detail?
Well, there's actually, at this point, this was not the situation in 1988, for example, but at this point, there's a lot of information in the literature about population data based on DNA typing. So anyone who is interested or involved in doing DNA typing analysis, either for paternity or for forensics, would be interested and need to keep up with this literature.
What types of literature do you read in that area, other than the general topic, obviously? But are there particular resources that you have in terms of particular journals and so forth?
There are 2 journals in which would include most of the papers, certainly not all. One would be the Journal of Forensic Science, and the other would be the American Journal of Human Genetics. Now, there are a few papers that are somewhere else. There's a couple in Science. Anyway, they're here and there, but for the most part, the 2 journals have covered more of them than maybe some other journals.
If you could describe, how do those journals, how closely do they deal with this actual concept of population frequencies and reporting results following DNA typing?
Objection, hearsay, and no foundation as to her expertise on this area.
Overruled. Proceed. Overruled. Proceed.
Are you sort of asking me what types of things are in the literature?
That you read, yes, in this area of population frequencies.
What I'm allowing, counsel, is what is the source of her knowledge in this area?
Yes.
All right, rephrase the question.
All right. With respect to your review of scientific literature regarding population frequencies, can you just tell us, as far as the literature you've described, does it
Between African Americans and Hispanics, or Caucasians and Hispanics, in how frequently these particular characteristics occur?
do you regularly speak with population geneticists about the methods used in your laboratory? And you've described the one on staff. Are there other individuals?
We have a particular person who's a population geneticist who we speak with on a regular basis, and that would be Dr.
As to the week, and ask for clarification as to the overall.
Proceed. There's nothing confusing about this. Proceed.
And that would be Dr. Bruce Weir.
Who is Dr. Bruce Weir?
Dr. Bruce Weir is a professor at North Carolina State University. He is a population geneticist and very highly regarded in this area.
Has he written in this area?
Yes, he has,
A little bit or extensively?
extensively.
In terms of these consultations with Dr. Weir, has he reviewed material at your laboratory that you utilize to report population frequency data?
Yes, he has.
As a result of that, have you incorporated any suggestions, comments, et cetera, that he may have about the methods of reporting data in your laboratory?
Overruled.
The basic answer to the question is yes. Most of his input is in some data that's being currently developed. He's also looked at much older data that was developed by our laboratory, but he hasn't, in the older data, he has not made any suggestions that resulted in large change or really any changes in procedure to speak of.
And that was after his having, when you say no changes, that was after his having looked at these procedures in place in your laboratory?
Yes, that's right.
All right. Is there a way you can describe the basic method by which population frequencies are actually calculated?
Yes.
All right. Could you do that? And would it help to use a diagram or chart?
This,
Overruled.
Would it assist you to use a drawing pad, or would you prefer to do it just by a description?
I think we better have the drawing pad.
Okay.
It might save time.
Conclusion of the day.
I believe this would be 255, People's Exhibit.
255. Mr. Clark.
Thank you. Dr. Cotton, if you would, and this will be People's Exhibit 255. Do you have a title that would describe this particular chart? Population frequencies, is that
Population data.
population data? All right. Now, if you could use that diagram to demonstrate the basic method by which population frequencies are determined to describe how common or how rare a particular genetic marker type is.
I would check it so far as the manual says, but not until that.
It's a standard principle.
With regard to your laboratory and how you calculate an estimate of how common or rare a characteristic is, how do you do that?
You are going to do that based on a population sample that's either been developed in your laboratory or somewhere else. In our case, our population samples for RFLP were developed in our laboratory. So if you go back to the explanation yesterday, what you're doing is you're taking a sample of people and you're doing the RFLP test on all of those people. So what I'm going to do on the diagram is sort of show you give you an example of what a sample of people looks like, and then show you how that would be used to estimate a frequency. So we're going to make a mini population on the diagram.
Now, let me stop you if I can, Dr. Cotton. You've written on this chart labeled population data what appears to be the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5.
Yes.
And then below each of those numbers, you've written in what appear to be 2 bands. Is that what those are intended to depict?
Right. In other words, I'm trying to show you a diagram of an autorad with 5 samples.
All right, go ahead.
Okay, in my 5 samples, because I have 2 bands for each sample, that is for each of these people, 1 from mother, 1 from father, I've got 10 bands altogether.
Actually, would it help to draw basically lines between these lanes so that at least on this diagram it'd be easier to tell them? And maybe in a different color also. Even starting as high as the numbers themselves that label the samples. Okay, now if you would proceed.
Now, let's suppose that we have yet one more sample. We'll call it A. I should make sure. And let's say, do I have one more color, maybe black or something?
I hesitate to try the dry erase. Now I'm concerned it might be erasable.
I have one back on my microwave. That's just the highlighter, Doctor. That'll fade.
Go back to my very simple example, and let's remember that where a band is, looking from the top to the bottom, is related to how big it is. And so let's say that we've determined that this band is, in sample A, is 5,000 base pairs. And so the question then is, well, how often would we see another person with this particular band? And although every time you do this, you're not going to go look at a whole set of X-ray films, you have all the data in a computer from those X-ray films, and the question you're saying is, I have a band at 5,000 here. In my population sample, how many other people do I see that have a band there? So let's say that this band was also 5,000, and this band was also 5,000, and this one was also 5,000.
Now, when you use the term 5,000, what are you referring to?
I'm saying the length of DNA that formed this band was 5,000 base pairs long, and using base pairs as a measure of length.
All right, go ahead.
And I've made this example very simple because I've made each of these bands be exactly the same size as this one, and that's not really necessarily, they wouldn't be necessarily that close. So out of the 10 bands that I see, 3 in my sample are 5,000 base pairs. So 3 out of 10 people, 3 out of 10 chromosomes would have a band at 5,000. So 0.3 would be the frequency for this band based on my limited sample.
What would you do then next?
Then you would go through the same exercise for the second band in that sample. And say this was, I didn't give this any counterparts, that's not so good. I'll tell you what, let's get rid of this one. And make it be here. Suppose this size was determined to be 2,000. And this size was also 2,000. And in this case, for this band, we had 1 out of 10 chromosomes that had this size. So the frequency for this band would be 0.1. The frequency for this combination then would be 2 times the product, 0.3 times 0.1.
Now, you talked about multiplying things together there, is that right?
Yes.
Why do you use multiplication?
Objection, Your Honor. No foundation for this witness.
Sustained. Raise question.
All right. With regard to the step you just did in terms of multiplying, what's the reason for that? Why do you multiply?
Objection, no foundation for this witness.
Sustained.
As far as, and let's talk about the databases that you have in the laboratory. You've drawn a diagram with basically 5 different persons' DNA
Yes.
on this particular chart.
On this chart.
How large are the actual databases that you use in your laboratory?
The databases in the laboratory range in size from about 150 to somewhat over 300. And the reason I'm saying range is that for one genetic locus, we may have, and for one racial group, this number of people that we've sampled may be different than for another genetic locus or another racial group. So that's the range of sizes of the samples that have been done in our laboratory.
Is that enough of a number of samples to look at to be able to estimate how rare something is?
Objection, no foundation for this witness.
Sustained.
With regard to this examination of databases, and you've used the example of what, results of an RFLP test here,
Yes.
how are these databases created in terms of how do you determine out of these 150 or more samples the various sizes of the various bands?
It's done in exactly the same way the casework analysis is done. You extract the DNA, you cut it with an enzyme, you run it on a gel, you do a southern blot, you get an autoradiograph, and you estimate the sizes of the bands and the autoradiograph with a computer imaging system exactly as you do a regular case.
Is this the same, this process you've described up till now, the same or different from those methods used in serological cases, like methods that type PGM for years previous?
Objection, no. Again, foundation is to serology.
Are you asking me if the calculation is similar?
This principle of looking at databases and determining relative rarity or how common characteristics are.
That would be similar to how those calculations are done for serological markers.
As to serological markers, once you've determined, let's say, an approximation of how common or rare a PGM type is, are there, using serological techniques, similar estimations made of the same sample at another genetic marker like ESD or GLO?
Objection, no foundation for this witness.
Sustained.
To your knowledge, how similar is the method of calculating frequencies in DNA typing to previous methods that have been in use for longer periods of time?
Objection, referring methods, no foundation for this witness.
Sustained.
All right. With respect to these fragments that you've described, and let's go back to the chart you've created, and you show 5,000 for, what is it, 4 of the particular markers, and then 2,000 for 2 of them?
Yes.
What role do the other fragments play that you have not at this point labeled an approximate size to, as far as determining from databases how common or rare something is?
How many bands you have is how many alleles you've looked at.
Okay.
So if you want to calculate how often you see something, it's going to be some percent of the total. So we have 10 total, 3 is some 30% of that.
Okay. And as far as your own training, in terms of reading the literature and performing these calculations in your laboratory, is what you've presented simply a simplified version of what you have reported in cases for a number of years?
Yes.
What happens when you look at additional markers as well? In fact, let me back up. Let me rephrase that. The diagram that you just created relates to one genetic location.
Yes.
Do you look at more than one genetic location normally when using the RFLP technique?
Normally, you would look at anywhere between 3 and 5. Now, you could look at more. Our laboratory, I should say, let me restate that. Our laboratory has the capability of looking at 5.
And do you, in casework, frequently use 5 particular locations?
Yes.
These locations are what? A different, well, what's the technical term for the term location? Do you have a word that you actually use in DNA typing?
Yes, it's the chromosomal locus. So the word that you'll hear is locus. When you say, I have a DNA probe or a genetic location, what you're really saying is the locus, which means the address on the chromosomes for this piece of DNA.
Is there a plural form for locus when you refer to multiple locations?
The loci.
And those are just scientific terms for where something is on the DNA molecule?
That's right.
Okay. May I have just a moment, Your Honor? Now, Dr. Cotton, referring to this diagram again and using the example of this one genetic marker location, in your training, and let's go back to the education you received in terms of your formal education, did any of these concepts of population genetics arise?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, to tell you the truth, it's been so long since I was in undergraduate school, I really couldn't tell you what course that they were in. Most of the principles that are used in DNA typing that relate to population genetics, you can find a pretty good discussion for in any college genetics textbook. Now, that doesn't mean the area is simple. There are complicating things that when an analyst such as Bruce Weir looks at a set of data, he's doing something more complicated than what's in a college genetic textbook. But the principles that are involved in doing these calculations are generally outlined at that level. That's where I would have been first exposed to them.
Okay, and then where next in chronological order would you have then been exposed to these same concepts?
When I went to Selmar.
And could you describe in a little more detail how you came about to be able to calculate these frequencies?
Objection, Mr. Member, question.
Overruled.
Basically, it was clear that we needed to be able to make an estimate of, for a particular DNA type or a DNA profile. It was clear that part of the information we needed to provide was how common or rare that profile would be. With assistance from the Cellmark lab in the UK and discussions with the staff at Cellmark, the group of us that were there at the time set up the procedures that we would use, gathered the population samples, did the analysis on the samples. About the time we were doing the analysis on the population samples, Dr. Foreman came to the lab. So it was really a combined effort, certainly not mine alone, to set up the procedures that we are now using for creating estimates for population frequencies. Now, let me make something clear. The calculations are laid out. They make some assumptions. In fact, the particular assumption that the calculation makes is that what's inherited at one genetic location does not affect what's inherited at another genetic location. These sets of assumptions it's not a formula that we devised. The formula that's used in these calculations was developed in the 1930s and is the same type of formula that's used in calculations for serological markers. What we did in the laboratory was develop the population data and then the methods to sort of query that data. And really what I'm getting at is that when I have a band that's 5,000 base pairs, there can be some variation in that size if you run the same sample over and over again. So when we query when we go to the database, we're never looking for something that's exactly this size. We're looking for a range of sizes, and the methodologies that we use to determine those ranges were all developed at Cellmark by the group of us who were working on that project at the time.
Now, you've described in sizing these samples just now the fact that it's an estimation. Is that right?
That's right.
As part of an estimation, then, when you look through databases to see if a sample matches, or not, well, let me rephrase that. When you look through a database to determine approximately how rare or how common a particular characteristic is, do you take any steps to make sure that you don't overstate the rarity of that characteristic?
Yes.
How do you do that?
The situation is that when you run a DNA sample on an agarose gel, as I described yesterday, that procedure has limitations. You're getting an autorad, you're using a computer imaging system, and you're estimating the size of the DNA that created a particular band. Even if I take the same sample and I run it 20 times or 50 times, the size estimates will not be identical. Let's go down and write underneath a little more realistic example.
All right. And you're writing on the same diagram, People's Exhibit 255?
Yes, I am. Let's say, and I'll put my new, more realistic example in parentheses. Let's say that this size came out to be 5,010 base pairs. And the next one came out to be 5,030. And the one over here came out to be 4,982. None of these numbers are exactly 5,000. So in my little mini database here, if I ask the question, now assuming that the figures are the ones in parentheses, if I said, how often do I see a person with a band at 5,000, I would look across here at these numbers and I will say, well, I hadn't seen one. So in my 10 people, I hadn't seen anyone, and then you'd have to make some assumption about, well, if you looked at more people, would you see one? Or, you'd have to make some calculation after that. So basically, I would very much underestimate this frequency if I look only for this exact size. But we know that there is imprecision in this gel system. It exists in every gel system that's like this, that's run for RFLP typing. It's a feature of the system, and it's important that if you're using this system, you understand that.
Is that, I'm sorry, Dr. Cotton, is that a feature when you say it's a limitation? Is that something unique to your laboratory?
No, what I'm trying to say is that any laboratory that's doing RFLP typing and running an agarose gel will have the same problem.
When you say agarose gel, that's simply what the gel is made of, agarose?
That's right.
Okay, go ahead.
And when I say problem, it's not an insurmountable problem, but it's something you want to be aware of. So if I now say, okay, I recognize that there's some imprecision in this measurement, and based on some work that I've done in the laboratory, I recognize that the range of sizes that I might get might go anywhere from a low of 4,980 to a high of 5,030. Now when I go to my database, I'm not going to look just for a size that's 5,000. I'll look for something in this range because I know, or I've determined in the laboratory, that this is the realistic size range that I could expect if I ran something over and over and over again.
How do you determine those ranges?
Well, you could do it you do it just what I said. You take a sample and you run it over and over and over again, and you see how much variation you get when you do that.
All right, go ahead.
And we've done that, and it's boring. Anyway, now when I go to the database, I'm looking at this window of sizes. And now, based on that window of sizes and the numbers that I have in parentheses, I would say I saw 3 people in my database whose sizes were in this range.
Does that have the effect then of ensuring that you don't overstate the rarity of characteristics that are similar or the same?
If your window is appropriately determined, it does.
Why do you adopt that approach in terms of frequency data calculation in your laboratory?
Because that's the logical approach. You can't, if you know the system has a limitation, you have to work around that limitation.
Okay. You also described the existence of a formula for when you're looking at more than one genetic marker.
Yes.
Why is that formula important when you look at more than one marker?
Objection at the foundation for this particular.
All right, let me see council side. We'll start with this.
questions of the board. You have described the basic method by which frequencies are calculated for a single marker. Is that right?
That's right.
What happens when you encounter more than one marker?
You calculate the frequency for the bands in the first marker, that pair of bands, calculate the frequency for the pair of bands in the second marker, and to determine the overall frequency for that combination of bands from the first marker and the second marker, you multiply those frequencies together.
Now, you mentioned, and if you would describe the fact that you make an assumption, well, let me rephrase that. You describe the fact that in using these multiple markers, more than one genetic marker, to calculate a population frequency estimate, and you made a comment about the necessity that they not be related to one another in some fashion. Have I characterized that correctly?
You're close, that they not be, that the assumption is that they are inherited independently.
What does that mean?
It means that, let me use a very sort of trivial example. Suppose you were looking at a combination of how many people had red hair and green eyes. What it would mean is that the trait for hair color and the trait for eye color didn't affect one another. That is, if you had red hair, you wouldn't automatically have green eyes. Hair color and eye color aren't really a great example of that, but the point works anyway. That is, you cannot and should not multiply these characteristics together if the inheritance of one of them is somehow connected with the inheritance of the other.
Okay, and that's the general concept of using multiple markers in an appropriate fashion?
They need to be independent of one another.
While I have you at the chart, and kind of as a last area, you've given this example of calculating frequencies or how that calculation process is done at one genetic marker. Can you actually give us an example by assigning some frequencies to, for instance, two of the bands as one of the on one of the samples, and then calculate the approximate frequency at that genetic marker?
Yes, if we just use our sample A here.
All right.
And we say that, we'll just draw it down here. And the frequency for this band was, the band that's 5,000 base pairs was 0.3, and the frequency for the band that's 2,000 base pairs is 0.1. And a factor of 2 gets added to this, or actually multiplied, is what I mean. That falls out of the fact that for any combination of two characteristics, there's two ways you can get that combination. And as in this example, you could have inherited the upper band from your mother and the lower band from your father, or you could have inherited the reverse, the upper band from your father and the lower band from your mother. And that results, when you do the math, in requiring that you have a factor of 2 here. So for the frequency for the pair of bands in sample A, it would be 2 times 0.3 times 0.1.
And what would that work out to?
Give me a calculator.
Calculator. If I give you a
0.03 times 2 would be 0.06, I guess.
And would that mean that that's the approximate frequency in your example of having those two characteristics in various populations or in a single population in this example?
That's right. Based on our little tiny database here, and assuming I did that in my head correctly, it would be 0.06.
Okay, very good. All right, if you could, then, Your Honor, finish with the chart at this point. And if you could retake the witness stand, Dr. Cotton.
Okay.
Now, Dr. Cotton, did your laboratory receive evidence in this case before the court today?
Yes, we did.
As far as receiving that evidence, when it first arrived, well, first of all, did it arrive on the same date or different dates?
All of the evidence did not arrive on the same date.
I'm going to show you, if I may, a series of boards that appear to depict or appear to include photographs of various containers of evidence. Have you had an opportunity to look at some boards that I just described before today?
Yes, I have.
And did you have the opportunity to look closely at those photographs, to compare the items shown in those photographs, as well as the dates found on those boards, and compare those to your own records from the laboratory as to the dates various items of evidence were received at your laboratory?
Yes, I did that.
All right. And referring initially to a large board marked People's Exhibit 177A. And in particular, with respect to what appear to be three specific items that are numbered off to the left, item number 7, 12, and an item marked O.J. Simpson blood exemplar. Did you have an opportunity to look at those photographs and the dates that are listed under the column marked to cell mark?
Yes, I did.
Did you receive each of those three items on the date after the date noted to the left of the photographs under the column to cell mark for those three item numbers?
Yes, that's right. I went to our records, to the case folder. I looked at the sheets that were used to log in the evidence, which record the date the evidence was received. And for each of those items, the date we received it was after the date that's displayed on the chart.
All right. And that would cover the three items that I just described?
That's right.
All right. I'm going to ask you to look at another chart, which I believe is 177. The letter I'll have to wait on. B as in boy. And I think we're able to see it, B as in boy. Let's go right to 177C. On this particular board, Exhibit 177C, in particular with reference to what are listed on the left as item numbers 47, 49, 50, 52, and 56, did you receive those particular items of evidence on the day after the dates listed under the column for each item labeled to cell mark?
That's correct.
All right. Then if we could move to the next board. 177D, as in David. And referring you to 177D, in particular, the items that are labeled Nicole Simpson blood exemplar, Ronald Goldman blood exemplar, and item number 78. Did you receive those items on the day after the specific dates listed under your column or under that column labeled to cell mark?
Yes, we did.
With regard to item number 78, can you tell us exactly what that item contained when it was received in your laboratory?
Yes, but I'll need to refer to the notebook.
And that's the two notebooks you earlier
Yes.
used.
Item 78 would have been a single bloodstained swatch.
As far as this term, well, strike that. As far as the items on this board, as well as the previous boards, did you at an earlier time look at the actual photographs up close to verify what's labeled on the various containers?
Yes, when I looked at the boards earlier, I checked for the initials of our analyst and the written dates on the envelopes as they're depicted, and I could read them off the photographs, and then I could check them against our records.
That was what I was going to ask. Did you then compare them to your own laboratory records of the various items as they were identified to your laboratory, as well as the days they were received?
Yes, I did.
Lastly, Dr. Cotton, referring you to what I believe is marked People's Exhibit 209, which lists in particular, off to the far right, what appear to be 4 photographs of items that, according to the chart, were directed to your laboratory on April 3rd, 1995. First of all, have you had an opportunity to look at the photographs on this board as well?
I don't actually think that I've looked at these.
Okay. We'll make arrangements for that and we'll return to it then.
Okay.
Now, as far as the evidence that you received and these various items, with the exception of what's listed on this latest board 209, were received in your laboratory and you were requested to test those various items?
That's right.
First of all, what was the type of evidence that was contained in most of these envelopes?
Most of them were bloodstained swatches.
Is that a common means of transmitting evidence from one location to another for typing?
Yes, it is.
Is it common that materials or evidence such as that be shipped at room temperature or ambient temperature, as you've used that term?
Yes, it is.
Once those items were received in the laboratory, were they identified in the manner that you described earlier, that evidence is identified when it's received in the lab?
Yes.
Now, I'd like to return, if I could, to your description of the earlier visit that included that by Dr. Blake and Dr. Lee.
Okay.
You described the fact that there was evidence actually cut by Dr. Blake. Is that right?
That's right.
I assume that came at a time after the evidence was received in the laboratory by your lab.
That's right.
Do you recall the date that that cutting by Dr. Blake took place on various items?
I don't independently recall the date right now. The notes made by the analyst reflect that the cuttings were made on 7/28/94.
July 28, 1994?
That's right.
Can you tell us exactly which items of evidence, that is by item number? First of all, can you, in referring to the documents in your laboratory, describe for us item numbers as used by the Los Angeles Police Department?
Yes, I can.
With respect to this cutting that occurred on this date that you've just described by Dr. Blake, can you tell us exactly which items were cut by him?
Yes.
Okay, could you do that then,
Okay.
please?
Now let me just pull out from the binder the right pages so I don't have to keep moving back and forth.
All right.
The items that were dealt with on that day would have been, you want me to just list them?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay. Would have been item number 78, item number 56, item number 52, item number 47, item number 12, and item number 7.
So 6 different items.
Yes.
With regard to these specific items, are you aware that item number 78 was blood-stained material taken from the bottom of Mr. Goldman's boot?
Yes, I am.
With respect to item number 56, are you aware that that's blood staining removed from a shoe print found at the Bundy residence?
Yes, I am.
With regard to item number 52, are you aware that that was a blood stain recovered from the walkway or actually driveway of that same Bundy residence?
Objection, Your Honor. The truth of the matter asserted.
Sustain.
Going back to this cutting process by Dr. Blake. First of all, Dr. Blake is not a member of your laboratory, correct?
That's right.
Is an individual not employed by your laboratory cutting on evidence in your laboratory a part of your protocol?
No, it's not.
Why did that happen?
We were asked specifically.
Sidebar before.
Proceed. It's done by court order, correct?
Is that correct, Dr. Cotton?
That's right.
And you followed that court order?
Yes, we did.
As far as a cutting, and first of all, can you tell us approximately how much was cut off by Dr. Blake of these items of evidence?
He cut approximately 10% from each stained swatch.
Now, without going into the actual number of swatches for the other 5 items, that is, other than item number 78, first of all, did the number of swatches for each item vary?
Yes, it did.
Did Dr. Blake cut off 10% of each and every swatch amongst this group of 6 evidence items?
Yes, he did.
And as you, I believe, testified earlier, those 10% portions were maintained in the custody of your laboratory?
That's correct.
This 10% portion, is there anything unique about 10%? In other words, is that a number that was just kind of picked out of thin air or what?
As part of our routine procedure, we normally set aside 10% of every sample whenever possible for future testing. So we made the prosecution aware that we intended to do that, and some things followed, and following that was the court order that Dr. Blake would take a 10% cutting. So I have assumed that the 10% arose from our initial information that that's what we would normally take.
Okay, when you say you would normally take 10% of a sample, is that in any other case you do that yourselves?
In every case, whenever the size of the sample allows, we will save 10% of the sample for future testing.
Do you have a term that you use to describe that 10% that you save when you're able to?
In the notes, it's just referred as an FTS sample, FTS just standing for future testing sample.
Are there circumstances in which you're unable to keep 10% for future testing purposes?
Yes.
Under what circumstances?
Basically, there's 2. One would be that the sample was simply so small that there was no way to physically remove 10% and still have enough left to test. Another thing, for example, if you had a single hair, you can't cut off 10% of the root of the hair. It's just too small to deal with. And the other circumstance would be we might take a 10% cutting, have trouble with the original 90%, and then go back and ask our client permission to use the remaining 10%. And if given permission, then we would go ahead and do that.
As far as the keeping of this future test sample or 10% cutting, is it kept for any purposes other than simply your ability to go back and use it if necessary?
The future testing sample, this 10%, is just available for whatever future testing might be done. It's not, I'm not saying that it's just for our Cellmark's own future testing, and if we have a problem, the 10% is set aside. Should that 10% that 10% could be given to another laboratory working for either side to be tested later on.
Can that future test sample be tested by the defense in criminal cases?
Of course.
Now, with regard to, and I'm referring now to the samples other than this initial set of 6 where Dr. Blake actually performed the cuttings, did you take future test samples on the remaining items of evidence?
Yes, I believe so.
Did you also receive known samples, that is, known bloodstains from identified persons?
We received 3 known blood stains. The actual identification of whom those bloodstains were from was not made known to us at the beginning, and they were just identified as exemplar C1, exemplar C2, and exemplar C3.
So these known or 3 known samples were basically not known to you in terms of who they came from, although you were made aware that they represented reference or standard samples from known people.
That's exactly right.
Sorry, I need to stop you at this moment. We need to take a 5-minute comfort break at this time, ladies and gentlemen. So let me ask you just to step back into the
No,
jury room. And Dr.
no,
Cox,
I
sit down,
just
stretch
got
your legs,
back.
and
No,
we'll
no,
take a
get
brief
back to work, Ito.
So again, Dr. Cotton, as far as your
So he
laboratory was
listens to
concerned
me.
at the time of testing, the identities of the persons from whom those 3 blood samples came from, known samples, were basically unknown to your laboratory.
That's right.
Now, after receiving various pieces of evidence in this case, was testing conducted on them using various DNA typing approaches?
Yes,
And would that be the RFLP as well as PCR approaches?
that's right.
How did you make decisions about which items, whether evidence and known sample or known samples, and which approach was going to be used with those various items? How do you do that?
Well, for some of the items, we were requested to do a particular thing. Most of that would be PCR. For some of the items, we were directed to do testing and, if possible, do RFLP testing. So for those items, we would have made an assessment of the quantity and quality of DNA that was extracted from those items, and then we would have proceeded to make some judgment as to whether we should try RFLP or go straight to PCR.
As far as the actual testing conducted in this case, do you have with you today the autorads from RFLP testing that was done?
Yes, I do.
Do you also have photographs from the various typing strips that were interpreted or results were obtained from after PCR amplification?
Yes, I do.
As far as the testing itself, and I'm referring to all of the testing conducted in your laboratory, did the controls work properly?
The controls work properly for all of the testing, with one exception, and we had a very faint dots in one reagent blank for one of the PCR tests.
All right, we'll return to that later. Was that, to your knowledge, the only instance in which that occurred?
Yes.
Incidentally, does the fact that you weren't informed of who these reference samples play any role in the testing itself?
No, it doesn't.
Why didn't you know who they were from?
I'm not sure who made that determination. I've been assuming that it was.
Sustained.
Was it a determination made by you?
No,
Was it a determination made by anyone in your laboratory?
no.
In the course of testing, well, let me rephrase that, go back one step. As far as you're not being informed of the identity of those known samples, is that unusual or normal?
It's unusual, but it's not the only time that we've received samples coded in some manner.
As far as the results that were ultimately obtained, did they include indications to you of mixtures of DNA?
There are 2 samples in the results that are clearly mixtures of DNA.
What is a mixture of DNA? Can you describe that briefly?
Well, in this circumstance, we're talking about the idea that the DNA that was extracted from the sample contains DNA from more than one person.
How are you able to determine that a sample has DNA from more than one person?
For an RFLP test, well, actually, it's the same for both. Anytime that you look at a single genetic location and you see more than 2 types, for an RFLP test, that would be, instead of just seeing 2 bands, you saw 3. Or for a PCR test, would be, instead of seeing just 2 types, like an A and a B, you would see an A, a B, and a C. Under those circumstances, you know immediately that you have DNA from more than one person.
As you've used the term earlier, is that contamination as you've used the term?
If you view let me back up a second. If those 2 DNAs are part of the original evidence as it was left at the scene, then in my view, that's not an instance of contamination. That's the true nature of the sample. If you want to back up and say, are these sterile samples? No, we've got two DNAs that are mixed together, but that's not a good reference point for this kind of discussion.
With regard to the procedure,
And that's why when they talk about how the police could have contaminated the evidence, they really can't. I mean, they could plant evidence, but if you put Nicole's and OJ's blood in a vial and shake it up, they won't mix. It's not like they changed the evidence. It's still, that strand of DNA is still going to be that strand of DNA.
and you've had an opportunity to review all the material relating to this case.
I have.
That includes the autorads themselves.
It does.
Does it include photographs?
Photographs of results?
Yes.
Yes.
Have you had an opportunity to review all of the documents that you described are kept in the course of testing in your laboratory?
Yes, I have.
From that review of the various documents and data, whether photographs or autorads themselves, do you have an opinion about whether or not correct procedures were used by the the two analysts in this case, Shuli Cooper and Paula Yates.
Yes, I do.
What is that opinion?
My opinion is that the procedures in the protocol were followed correctly in the testing in this case.
As far as the procedures that were used in this case, in your opinion, are those proper scientific procedures for DNA typing?
In my opinion, they certainly are.
Now, with regard to, and let's focus immediately on RFLP testing itself, do you have with you an autoradiograph that depicts the...
I don't understand something though, guys. Like, I 100% feel this woman is truthful and completely knowledgeable about what she's talking about. So when she says, were the steps followed correctly? And she says, yeah, they were. Like, I believe her. I believe right now that everything was followed correctly. In this, the testing of this and the testing of that. So is it because, I don't know, is it because of bias? I don't know. Why did the jury not think the same thing? I don't under I don't under I heard what she said. I heard everything she said in her charts and her diagrams, and I believe her 100%. I don't have a doubt that she's telling the truth on the stand. So why did the jury like, nah, she's not right.
3 standards or known samples in this case?
Yes.
And have you also, well, first of all, do you have the original autoradiographs with you?
Yes, I do.
Do you have a policy in your laboratory about releasing original autoradiographs?
Yes, we do.
What is that policy?
We don't release them until we come to court. If they are left as part of the court record, that's okay. But prior to that, we maintain the original data, which is the autoradiographs, in our custody.
For what reason? Actually, let me rephrase that question. In terms of the originals themselves, do they represent the best data available?
They do.
All right. With regard to the autoradiograph I mentioned that deals or demonstrates the results obtained from DNA from the 3 identified samples, that is without name but identified as known persons, does that autorad, has it already been marked in this case?
They all have the 3 known people on them.
Okay. Let's go back then to what I believe is Exhibit 246, if I recall correctly. And may I approach the witness, Your Honor?
You may.
Showing you Exhibit 246. Can we use that autoradiograph to show what the DNA appears, or what it appears like for the 3 known samples in this case?
Yes.
So I just take one look at what she's looking at. Thank you.
246.
Your Honor, at this time I have, or actually the laboratory has made a number of copies of this particular autoradiograph that shows the 3 standards, that is the 3 known individuals. It has one evidence lane with nothing showing. And it would be my request that these copies be distributed to the jury. Yes,
Have you shown these to counsel?
they have one copy.
All right, Mr. Clark, may I see one of those, please? Yes. I take it these were all duplicates of the same?
Yes.
Do you want to hand it to Mrs. Robertson? I just need to see one. All right, and Mr. Clark, these are exact duplicates of 246.
Yes.
And that's with item 56 removed, correct?
I'm sorry?
That's with item 56 removed. Never mind. All right, Mr. Clark, you have enough to go around?
Yes.
Mr. Neufeld?
I just hadn't seen the copies, John. I just wanted to. Sometimes some variation. That's all I want to
Mr.
make
Clark,
sure
why don't you let
it's
the
consistent. That's all. Right?
Sometimes there's a variation in a photocopy. Is that true? Okay.
I'm going to compare it.
demonstration purposes at this point, because we're not doing any comparison yet, correct?
Only amongst the three knowns.
All right, with court report, please.
One auto rad, Your Honor. That's an acceptable place for it. I have 17 in my hand, and I actually have one if the court would keep that.
Well, thank you.
I'm showing you a series of x-rays that have not been marked as yet. Actually, does the court prefer they be marked or not? I'm going to ask that they be distributed to the jury.
Let's call these, actually give them a separate number since they're going to be exhibited to the jury. They should be part of the record.
All right. Would that be 256 then?
256. Collectively, 17 copied auto rads.
Dr. Cotton, have you had an opportunity to look at the 17 copies of the auto rad that will be marked People's 256?
Yes, I looked at them when I was still at the lab before I gave them to you.
And are they in fact copies, as is Exhibit 246, of one of the auto rads in this case?
They are.
With respect to those auto rads as contained in both 246 and now in 256, does that auto rad represent data from this case?
Yes, it does.
And what does it depict, just in general terms, as far as samples?
The samples that are on here, besides the control samples, are the known blood from Mr. Simpson, the known blood from Nicole Brown, and the known blood from Ronald Goldman. And also on this film, had there been anything to see, would have been analyzed item number 56.
Is that the shoe print?
Yes, there is, however, no DNA banding pattern that was obtained from item 56.
So can we use this auto rad as a demonstration of the RFLP process and differences, if any, between the three known persons in this case?
Yes, we can.
As far as this auto rad itself, is it labeled with names for each of these three individuals, Mr. Simpson, Nicole Brown, and Ronald Goldman?
Yes, it is.
Were those labels put on at some later date after the auto rad was initially produced?
Yes, they were.
In other words, during the testing, you didn't know who the individuals were, correct?
That's right.
That is, the identities of these known samples.
That's right.
Were the labels then put on after your results were reported?
Yes, they were.
All right. Your Honor, I was going to ask that those be distributed to the jury and then utilize the original on the Elmo so that the witness can describe what's shown on this autoradiograph.
Well, given the hour, I would suggest that we distribute them since we've held it up and shown them. Let's let the jury see what an auto rad looks like, then we'll start with that tomorrow morning.
Very good.
All right, let's let the jury see what an auto rad looks like.
May I hand it to the jury?
You may.
Wait.
evidence concerning mixtures.
Evidence concerning mixtures. That's what we're going to start tomorrow, guys. Sounds fun. Sounds so exciting. Thank you for coming out today. I really appreciate it. I'll see you all again real soon. Hope you have a great day, guys. Bye.